At 38, Clarissa found herself on a cold sidewalk. Nothing but a torn bag, a sleeping baby in her arms, and a promise no one intended to keep. She had no home, no help, no plan. But what she had was love, and that night it had to be enough. She never imagined her life would come to this. Not death, exactly, but something was dying. The quiet kind of death that starts with dreams and ends with hope. Clarissa had never lived recklessly. She was measured, practical. A woman who followed the rules, worked hard, did what she was taught was right. Still, here she was. 6 months earlier, she left a quiet town in Kentucky with her husband, Aaron, and their newborn daughter, Ellie. Aaron had found what he called the opportunity of a lifetime, a job at a tech startup in Portland. It wasn't just a move. It was meant to be a rebirth. Clarissa hesitated. She liked stability. Her job as a nursing assistant was modest but safe. But Aaron was convincing. 2 months, he told her. I'll take care of everything. Just trust me. She did. They sold the car, cashed out their savings, packed a suitcase, and left for a promise. At first, things felt survivable. They crashed in the spare room of a friend's apartment. Clarissa stayed home with Ellie, trying to adapt to the grayness of Portland, the drizzle, the unfamiliar rhythms. Aaron chased leads, sent resumes, came home later and later, then stopped coming home at all, until one day he didn't return. No warning, no fight, no goodbye. Just a note on the counter: I failed. I'm sorry. I'm not strong like you. He vanished, and Clarissa was left behind, alone with a 6-month-old baby, a torn bag, and silence. The apartment was no longer theirs, the rent unpaid, the fridge was empty. The phone calls to family went unanswered. 2 days later, the landlord knocked. Not unkindly, but firm. You have until tomorrow. And that was that. She stepped out onto the street with a baby, a bag, and a mind trying not to unravel. There was no backup, no cushion, only the weight of the child in her arms and the echo of a promise that had turned to dust. She walked for hours, her shoes soaked through. Her coat barely held back the wind. One diaper left, a rinsed-out baby bottle. Shelters were full, soup kitchens closed, churches locked. Eventually, she found a quiet sidewalk beneath a flickering street lamp, and she sat. The bag at her side was worn, fraying. Inside were 2 diapers, a pacifier, a half-used jar of baby food, a blanket, and an envelope Aaron had once called our future. Clarissa didn't cry. She had cried earlier, screamed into pillows, whispered to the ceiling. Now she was silent. She just held Ellie close and whispered, I promised I'd protect you. The city moved around her. Tires on wet asphalt, distant conversations, laughter echoing from a bar down the street. But none of it touched her. She was no longer part of that world. If she disappeared that night, there would be no headlines. No one would ask where she went. No one would know she had been there at all. Her presence faded into the background of the city's noise, until even she questioned if she was still real. She adjusted the blanket over Ellie's chest, listened to her tiny breath. In, out, in, out. Still warm, still alive. That had to be enough. Clarissa didn't think about tomorrow. Thinking too far ahead led to panic. Instead, she focused on each breath, each heartbeat, each quiet minute where Ellie was still sleeping. The numbness in her fingers didn't matter. The pain in her legs, the hunger in her stomach, they were far away. She noticed how many people passed without looking, how others glanced quickly, then looked away, how no one asked, not even once. She didn't feel anger, just something colder, like she was vanishing inch by inch, and no one had the courage to say they saw it happening. The envelope was still in the bag. She pulled it out, unfolded it. Aaron had said it was their way forward. An investment. A new beginning. But it was a joke. A fake startup. A fraudulent pitch deck. Scribbled lies. But on the last page, a name. A contact. A foundation. An address. Something real? Or just another illusion? She stared at it for a long time. Part of her wanted to rip it up. Part of her wanted to believe. But belief was a dangerous thing now. She had believed in Aaron, in the plan, in the future. And yet, here she was. Still, that scrap of information was all she had left. So she folded the envelope again, slipped it back into the bag. Ellie stirred in her arms. Clarissa kissed the baby's forehead, whispered again, "We're still here." She leaned back against the wall, closed her eyes. Not to sleep, sleep was too risky, but to rest. Just a little. If she woke up, maybe she'd try again. If she didn't, she had kept her promise. For one more night, she had nothing but a bag and a promise. But tomorrow, she might have a reason. When morning came, Clarissa didn't know how long she had slept, if she had slept at all. Her body ached. Her back felt as if it had splintered from the cold. Her arms, wrapped tightly around Ellie, were numb, but the baby was warm. Ellie stirred, let out a soft whimper, and then blinked awake. And in that moment, something ancient moved inside Clarissa. Something deeper than fear, older than despair. A kind of silent determination that only mothers understand. She looked down at her child, still here, still breathing. And so, she had to move. She stood slowly, groaning as her joints resisted. Her knees wobbled, her head spun. But she gritted her teeth, rocked Ellie gently, and whispered, "It's okay. We're going." But going where? There was no plan. No money, no shelter. Only that crumpled envelope in the torn bag. The name on it felt like a myth, now something scribbled in desperation. But it was all she had. So she walked. The address was scratched next to the foundation's name, barely legible. Downtown, a few miles away. Clarissa had no car, no phone, no way to call ahead. She would have to walk the entire way. And she did. Through the early morning fog, past sleeping tents under bridges, through alleys that smelled of old rain and broken hopes. Her legs trembled. Her stomach was a hollow drum. But her hands, holding Ellie, stayed steady. She spoke to no one, looked at no one, only forward. Every step felt like a question. Would they listen? Would they help? Or would it be another locked door? By the time she reached the building, her vision was blurry. A small glass door. A brass plaque on the wall, Rowan Foundation Emergency Outreach Services. It didn't look like much, but it was the first door she'd found that didn't scare her. She stepped inside. The warmth hit her like a wave. A woman at a front desk looked up and immediately stood. She didn't ask questions. She didn't make Clarissa explain. She saw the torn bag. She saw the baby. And without a word, she walked around the desk and led Clarissa into a small room. There was a couch, a kettle, a blanket. Clarissa collapsed onto the couch and burst into tears. Not quiet ones. Not graceful ones. Ugly, primal sobs that came from somewhere deep, somewhere untouched for years. The woman sat beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder, and waited. No clipboard, no forms, just presence. Clarissa couldn't explain everything. She didn't know where to begin. All she could say was, "I'm tired," and the woman nodded. "You don't have to be strong right now." That was all she needed. The next few hours were a blur. A warm bottle for Ellie. A blanket wrapped around Clarissa's shaking body. Food, actual food. Not just for survival, but for dignity. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the smell of soup filled the room. She ate slowly, unsure whether to cry or smile. When the director came in, an older man with kind eyes, he asked only one question. What do you need today? Not in general. Not in theory, just today. Clarissa said quietly, a place to sleep. He nodded. We'll take care of it. That night, she slept on a cot in a women's shelter affiliated with the foundation. The mattress wasn't soft. The room wasn't silent. But for the first time in weeks, she felt safe. Ellie slept soundly beside her. And Clarissa stared at the ceiling, whispering, we made it through the first storm. It wasn't over. Not by far. But now, she wasn't alone. The next morning, she returned to the foundation. This time, she asked if she could help. Clean the room. Fold blankets. Watch over the front desk for an hour. The woman who had helped her smiled. Why? And Clarissa said, because I need to feel like I matter. That was the beginning of her return. Tiny tasks, one at a time. Folding laundry, serving soup, reading to other mothers' children while they filled out forms. At first, it was just a distraction from fear, but soon it became purpose. Each act was a stitch, mending the torn fabric of her identity. And over time, she noticed something else. People started calling her by name. Clarissa, can you help here? Clarissa, you did a beautiful job organizing this. She hadn't heard her own name spoken kindly in months, and it healed something in her. One afternoon, she was asked to speak to a new mother, young, terrified, alone. Clarissa didn't know what to say, so she sat beside her, held her hand, and whispered, you're not broken. You're just tired. The girl cried, and Clarissa held her. Something inside her shifted. She didn't want to just survive. She wanted to give, to build, to matter again. One day, the director approached her and said, we're hiring for a part-time outreach assistant. Clarissa blinked. I haven't worked in over a year. He smiled. You've been working every day since you got here. They trained her, slowly, taught her how to input forms, schedule appointments, listen with empathy. And she was good at it, not because she had experience, but because she understood. She had been the woman with nothing but a bag and a baby. Now, she was the woman helping others who walked in with the same haunted eyes. She didn't make much money, but it was hers. She opened a bank account, found a shared apartment, bought a second-hand stroller. The day she rolled Ellie through the park in that stroller, she cried again. Not out of pain, but pride. People smiled at her. Some even greeted her. And this time, she smiled back. She didn't feel invisible anymore. One evening, after Ellie fell asleep, Clarissa sat at the kitchen table and took out that same torn envelope. She smoothed the edges, studied the handwriting, and whispered, you broke me. But you also pointed me here. She didn't hate Aaron anymore. She had let go of that weight. It was too heavy to carry into her new life. Now she had different promises, ones she wrote for herself. I will not disappear. I will not forget what I've endured. And I will help others rise. The storms still came. There were nights when Ellie cried for hours, mornings when money was tight. But now, Clarissa met those days with steadiness. She had a life built on something stronger than luck or love alone. She had purpose. She had clarity. And above all, she had endured. Her past didn't define her. But it did remind her every time someone new walked into that foundation that survival is not weakness. It is proof of unimaginable strength. Clarissa never planned to return to the sidewalk where her life had unraveled. But sometimes life circles back not to reopen wounds, but to prove how far you've come. It had been over a year. The air was colder now, sharper. The city felt smaller, more familiar. Ellie was walking, speaking in fragments, her eyes bright with curiosity. Clarissa held her hand as they stepped onto the corner where it all began. The same street lamp, the same crack in the sidewalk. But this time, she was standing. Not because everything was perfect, but because she had rebuilt something solid beneath her feet. She bent down beside Ellie and whispered, "This is where everything changed." Ellie didn't understand, but Clarissa did. That spot once filled with silence and fear now held power. Because she had survived it. She didn't stay long. Just a moment, a silent vow, spoken only in her chest. Then she turned and walked away, this time with purpose. At the foundation, things had shifted too. She was no longer the quiet helper behind the desk. She had been promoted to program coordinator, responsible for guiding new arrivals, organizing services, training volunteers. But more than that, she had become a presence. People listened when she spoke, not because of her title, but because they saw in her the truth they feared in themselves, that falling is real, and so is rising. Then, one night, she met Mia. The staff called her unreachable. 19 years old, silent, defensive, 7 months pregnant. Found sleeping on a train platform with a black eye and a frozen expression. Clarissa reviewed her intake file, then set it aside. She didn't believe in files anymore. They never told the whole story. She asked to meet Mia personally. The girl barely looked at her when they sat down. Clarissa didn't push. She didn't ask the usual questions. Didn't mention shelters or options or recovery timelines. She simply said, "I know what it feels like to sit on a sidewalk with nothing but a bag and a baby." Mia flinched, looked up, and for the first time in days, said a word. How? Clarissa didn't tell her everything, but enough. Enough for Maya to see that broken wasn't permanent, that pain didn't mean the end. That survival was not shame. They talked for an hour, then 2, then more. Clarissa gave her space and presence and trust. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Mia began to soften. One afternoon, she asked if Clarissa would go with her to the hospital. "I'm scared I'll run if I go alone." Clarissa didn't hesitate. She held her hand through the entire exam, helped her breathe during the ultrasound, watched as Mia stared at the screen, eyes wide, a heartbeat, a flicker, a future. Clarissa remembered that feeling. The terrifying joy of realizing something inside you depends on you and wants to live. Weeks passed. Mia moved into transitional housing, started therapy, enrolled in classes. One evening, she knocked on Clarissa's office door. "I'm naming her Hope," she said softly. Clarissa smiled, and for the first time in a long time, felt peace. But what happened next proved that healing is never linear. One night, Clarissa received a call. Mia had vanished. No warning. No note. Nothing. Clarissa drove through the city for hours, checking train stations, shelters, old corners. She found her at dawn, sitting under the same overpass where she had been found months before. Alone, crying, frozen. Clarissa didn't lecture. She sat beside her, silent. After a while, Mia whispered, "I don't think I can do this. What if I mess her up? What if I become what hurt me?" Clarissa reached into her coat, pulled out something worn and familiar. A folded, yellowed envelope. "This is all I had," she said. "A torn bag, a baby, and a promise no one intended to keep. But I kept it. For her." She looked Mia in the eye. "You're scared. So was I. You think you'll break. So did I. But I didn't, and neither will you." They sat there for a long time. Then Mia took her hand, and they stood up together. Mia gave birth 2 weeks later. Clarissa was there, not as staff, not as a coordinator, as family. When the baby was placed in Mia's arms, Clarissa saw it happen to shift. Mia didn't just hold her daughter. She claimed her, with eyes full of fear and love. That night, Clarissa walked home under the same sky she once cursed. But now it felt different. The stars were still distant, the streets still rough, but inside her chest was something steady, a fire that hadn't gone out. It burned with purpose, with memory, and with the truth that survival isn't luck. It's a choice, 1,000 tiny choices made in the dark, one step at a time, and in helping others take those steps. She had rewritten her own story. She was no longer the woman with nothing but a bag and a promise. She was the woman who turned that promise into power. Clarissa stood in front of the building with trembling hands. It looked exactly the same. Same narrow doorway. Same faded sign. Same brass plaque that once felt like a lifeline Rowan Foundation Emergency Outreach Services. But today, something was different. Today, she had a key. She gripped it tightly, almost afraid to use it, as if unlocking the door might break the spell of how far she'd come. Behind her, the morning air was cold, crisp. Ellie's small fingers tugged gently at her coat. "Is this your job, Mommy?" Clarissa knelt, brushed a strand of hair behind Ellie's ear, and nodded. "Yes, baby. This is where we help people." Ellie smiled. "Like you?" Clarissa's eyes stung. She kissed Ellie's forehead, then stood tall. Key in hand, she opened the door. Inside, the building smelled the same faint coffee, old books, something warm and worn. The same room where she had once collapsed in tears, now waited with clean light and quiet purpose. She set her bag down behind the desk. Not the torn bag from that first day, but a new one, neat, strong, purposeful, a small symbol. But to her, it meant everything. She turned on the lights, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, opened the blinds, and paused. In the reflection of the window, she saw herself, older, tired, but standing, no longer begging for help, now giving it. She had been trained for this role for months, had shadowed the previous coordinator, learned the systems, built trust with staff, listened, led quietly. But today, it was hers, fully, officially. Her first task was simple review the intake forms for 3 new arrivals. She sat at the desk and opened the folder. The names were different. The stories weren't. A mother with 2 children. A young man fleeing abuse. An older woman whose landlord vanished, leaving her locked out and alone. Clarissa closed the folder. She didn't need their paperwork to understand them. She knew the eyes. She had seen them in the mirror. A knock at the door broke her silence. A volunteer stepped in, smiling. A teenage girl, new, nervous, eager. Clarissa welcomed her, showed her the pantry, the intake room, the small kitchen where donations were sorted. They moved through the building like 2 parts of a greater rhythm, quiet but essential. Later that morning, Clarissa paused by the hallway mirror. Her reflection caught her off guard. She wasn't the same woman from a year ago. Her hair was different. Her posture was stronger. But it was her eyes that changed most, still tired, still carrying stories. But now, filled with clarity, conviction, compassion. Around noon, a woman arrived at the door. Thin, pale, clutching a toddler who wouldn't stop crying. Clarissa opened the door herself. She didn't flinch at the smell of the street, didn't shrink from the woman's sunken eyes. She saw her, truly saw her. She offered a chair, a bottle of water, a place to breathe. And she sat beside her, quietly. The woman didn't speak for nearly 10 minutes. Then she whispered, "I don't know where to go." Clarissa's response came instantly. "You're already here." That moment held more power than 1,000 intake forms. The woman cried. Clarissa didn't fill the silence. She let it stretch, let it breathe, because she remembered. She remembered what it meant to be met with stillness instead of solutions. To be held in space, not judged for being broken. Later that afternoon, while organizing the donations room, Clarissa found something unexpected. A baby carrier. Not brand new, but clean. Strong. She picked it up slowly, held it in her hands like a memory. She remembered carrying Ellie against her chest. Her weight. Her warmth. The fear that came with every breath. Will we survive another day? She placed the carrier in a donation bin labeled Urgent Need, because someone else would need it soon. And she would be ready. The hours passed in soft motion. Staff meetings, checklists, small crises, and quiet victories. By early evening, the center quieted. Clarissa stepped into the courtyard at the back of the building. It was small, just a bench, a few plants, a narrow strip of sky overhead. She sat there as the light began to fade, closed her eyes, and remembered. She remembered the hunger, the shame, the wind biting through her coat as she tried to hold on to a child and a piece of her soul. She remembered what it felt like to be invisible, and she reminded herself never again. Not for her. Not for anyone who walked through her door. After dinner, Ellie sat in the office coloring. Clarissa watched her daughter, the way her lips curled when she focused, the little hum she made under her breath. This child had saved her, without ever knowing it, without ever asking. She reached into her drawer and took out something wrapped in tissue. The old envelope, faded, soft, edges frayed. She had kept it through everything, not because of what it once promised, but because of what it led to. She unfolded it gently. Inside was nothing useful anymore, but the act of holding it, of remembering who she had been when she first clutched it in desperation, kept her grounded. Ellie looked up. "What's that?" Clarissa smiled. "An old map," she said. Ellie giggled. "A treasure map?" Clarissa nodded slowly. "Yes, baby. Exactly that." When the center closed for the night, Clarissa locked the door herself. She walked down the steps slowly, Ellie in tow, the city humming around them. They passed a woman sitting on a bench nearby. Clarissa offered her a quiet nod, not out of pity, but recognition, because strength recognizes strength. At home, after Ellie fell asleep, Clarissa lit a small candle. She sat at the table and pulled out a notebook. She began writing. Not reports, not to-do lists, but truths. I am not who I was. I am not what I survived. I am what I choose to become. And as the candle flickered low, she added, "This is the life I built, and no one can take it from me. Dear me, I'm writing from a place I once believed I'd never reach, from warmth, from peace, from a life that's mine, not borrowed, not broken, not begged for. You don't know this place yet. Right now, you're sitting on a sidewalk, knees pressed to your chest, your arms wrapped around a baby who won't stop shivering. The cold has crept into your bones, and the silence of the city feels louder than any scream. You're not crying anymore. That part passed hours ago. Now, you're just quiet. I remember the weight in your chest. The question you refused to speak aloud, is this how I disappear? You were invisible that night. People passed. Some looked. Most didn't, not really. And in your heart, something began to fracture, not from impact, but from being ignored. Let me start by saying you survive this. No, you do more than survive. You rise, not because the world suddenly becomes kind, not because someone rescues you, but because something inside you refuses to let go. Even now, there's a fire burning quietly beneath all that numbness. That fire, that's you. You don't see it yet, but it's the reason you're going to stand up. It's the reason you'll walk toward a building with a name you barely remember from a crumpled envelope. You'll step inside not with confidence, but with nothing left to lose. And for the first time, in what feels like forever, someone will see you, truly see you, not as a burden, not as a failure, but as a woman who has been holding the sky up with both arms while the ground disappeared beneath her. That day will be the first thread in the stitching of a new life. You'll eat again. Not just food, but warmth, words, human voices that don't sting. You'll sleep in a bed, a thin mattress, faded sheets, but still, safety. You'll wake to your daughter's breath on your neck and realize the worst didn't take you. It came close, but it didn't win. And then slowly you'll start helping. Not because someone told you to, but because doing something, anything, makes you feel real again. You'll fold laundry, sweep floors, listen to women whose pain mirrors yours so perfectly it feels like hearing your own echo. At first, you'll question it. Why am I still here? Why didn't I run? But over time, those questions will fade, not because they're answered, but because they no longer matter. What matters is what you begin to build, not all at once, but piece by piece, a routine, a rhythm, a whisper of confidence. And then, one day, someone will call you by your name, not with suspicion, not with pity, with respect. You won't know what to do with it, but you'll hold on to it like a thread, and that thread will pull you forward. You'll meet a girl named Mia, 19, pregnant, silent. She'll sit in the same chair you once collapsed into, and you'll recognize her pain before she says a word. You'll sit beside her not as a staff member, but as a mirror. She'll ask, "How do you know what I'm feeling?" And you'll answer, "Because I once thought I'd never feel anything again." Helping her will heal something in you that therapy couldn't touch. You'll realize that your scars are sacred. Because they became bridges, you'll become part of something bigger, trusted, needed. You'll help mothers fill out forms, women how to breathe during labor. You'll walk through the city with a stroller that was once a dream. Ellie will grow. She'll laugh. She'll tell people, "My mommy helps people," and you will smile without guilt. You'll stop measuring your worth by what you lost and start honoring it by what you endured. Eventually, they'll offer you the position program coordinator. You'll hesitate. You'll hear your old self whisper, "Are you sure you're ready?" But then you'll remember who you were when you arrived, and you'll say yes. The first morning you unlock that building with your own key, your hands will shake, not with fear, with reverence. Because you'll remember every step that brought you back there this time, not as the one needing help, but as the one holding the door open. You'll see women come in with swollen eyes and silent mouths. You'll offer them a chair, a blanket, a look that says you're not crazy. You're not weak. You're just tired. And tired people don't need judgment. They need rest. And when they cry, you'll hold the space, because you remember how sacred it was when someone did the same for you. At night, when Ellie is asleep, you'll write in a notebook, not because you have answers, but because you finally have your own voice. You'll write things like, "I am the sum of every time I didn't quit. I am not the woman who was left. I am the woman who stayed for herself. I am not lost. I am becoming." And you'll believe it. Some nights will still be hard. You'll have flashbacks, moments where the old panic rises like a tide. But now you'll know what to do with it. You'll breathe, you'll cry, and then you'll rise. You'll rise because you made a promise. And unlike the one that broke you, this one you'll keep. Clarissa, I want you to hear me now. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not too late. You are not a mistake. You are a story still unfolding. You are a light buried under rubble. But you will rise. You will rebuild. You will become the woman you were always meant to be. And one day, You'll write this letter not for closure, but as a gift to remind others, that even when the world turns its back, you don't have to disappear. You can stay, you can grow, you can lead, and you can love again and again and again. Your pain is not your ending. It's the beginning of something unshakable. With love, you. Ellie was 21 when she found the envelope. It had been tucked inside an old box marked, "Don't throw away," in black marker, faded from time and dust. She almost missed it while sorting through her mother's things. Clarissa hadn't died. She was very much alive, just preparing to downsize, move to a smaller place closer to the coast, something quieter. Ellie had offered to help pack, and in the process stumbled upon history. The box was filled with paper memories, photocopies of certificates, photos from community events. A folded drawing Ellie had made as a child stick figures holding hands beneath the sun. And then, near the bottom, the envelope, old, fragile, soft at the edges. She recognized her mother's handwriting immediately, but it wasn't the writing that froze her breath. It was the note taped to it. This is where it all began. Ellie sat on the floor, legs crossed, fingers trembling. She opened it carefully. Inside wasn't money or documents, just a letter and a photograph. The photo showed a woman sitting on a sidewalk, wrapped in a coat, cradling a baby Ellie herself. The woman in the picture had tired eyes and a fierce grip on life. Clarissa. Ellie began to read. To my daughter, Ellie, if you're reading this, it means I've finally had the courage to let you see who I really was. I used to be ashamed of this part of my story, the part where I was alone, the part where we had nothing, the part where I thought you deserved someone better. But what I've learned is this: it wasn't weakness that brought me to that sidewalk. It was love. You saved me, Ellie. You didn't know it. But every breath you took kept me breathing. Every sound you made reminded me I was still needed, still alive. I don't remember everything from those days, but I remember how cold the pavement felt, how heavy silence could be, and how one promise, one torn bag, and one baby in my arms became the reason I refused to give up. You were that reason. Ellie paused. She had grown up knowing bits of the story, the shelter, the foundation, the volunteer work, but never like this. She had never seen her mother as broken, only strong, only radiant. But now, that strength had roots, and those roots were planted in survival. Clarissa walked in minutes later, holding 2 mugs of tea. She saw Ellie with the envelope and froze. Their eyes met. No words were needed. She sat beside her daughter and placed a hand over hers. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then Ellie whispered, "You kept this." Clarissa nodded. "It reminded me where we came from. Why didn't you ever tell me?" Clarissa exhaled slowly. "Because I wanted you to build your life forward, not downward into the weight I carried. But now, I think you're strong enough to hold it." Ellie didn't cry. She didn't need to. What she felt was pride. Not pity, not shock. Only the realization that her mother's light had come from fire. Real fire. And she was the proof it didn't burn her away. The next day, Ellie returned to the foundation. She hadn't been there in years. Now it had expanded. A new wing, more staff. Photos on the wall of Clarissa with dozens of women she had helped. Mothers, daughters, survivors. Ellie walked the halls quietly, tracing her fingers along the doorframes. She found the original intake room, the one her mother always described as where everything changed. And there, on the desk, was something new, a plaque. Clarissa May, she turned pain into purpose. Below it, founding coordinator, 2005-2024. Ellie smiled, not just because of the honor, but because she finally understood what it meant. That building wasn't just brick and walls. It was her mother's soul built piece by piece from everything the world tried to take. That night, Ellie wrote her own letter to her future daughter, because stories like Clarissa's weren't meant to be hidden. They were meant to be passed on. Proof that resilience is real, that love can rebuild, that even in silence we carry power, and that a woman with nothing but a baby and a promise can change everything. There's something you need to understand. Clarissa's story isn't rare because she was broken. It's rare because she didn't stay that way. Most people, when abandoned, humiliated, stripped of everything, don't rise, not because they're weak, but because the world teaches them that silence is survival, that dignity has a deadline, that worth is measured in what you can still offer others. Clarissa refused to believe that. She sat on a sidewalk with nothing but a baby, a bag, and a broken promise, and instead of disappearing, she chose to stay. She chose to feel the cold, to hold her child tighter, not looser, to whisper a promise to herself that no one else could hear, "I will not vanish." That moment didn't change the world, but it changed her, and sometimes that's enough. Because when one person changes, others do too. Mia changed. Hope was born. A shelter grew. A city listened. And a generation of women who once thought survival was their ceiling began to build lives that reached the sky. But this isn't just about Clarissa. This is about you. Yes, you, the one watching this, the one who's been carrying something quietly. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's shame. Maybe it's a voice in your head that whispers, "You're too far gone. It's too late." Who would ever understand? But here's the truth Clarissa would want you to hear. You are not invisible. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not weak for hurting. You are not hopeless for needing help. And no, your story is not over, because you're still here. And while you're here, you can choose. You can choose to stay, to stand, to speak, to ask for help, to hold on, to whisper your own promise quietly, maybe even trembling, but real, "I will not disappear." And that promise can change everything. It won't happen all at once. Clarissa didn't wake up strong. She didn't become a leader in a day. She became powerful in the little things, in sweeping floors, in holding someone's hand, in showing up even when her hands shook. That's what real strength looks like. Not noise, not applause, but presence. So if you're sitting in your own version of that sidewalk, whether it's a job that's crushed you, a relationship that vanished, a family that doesn't see you anymore, a past that feels too heavy to carry, know this: you are not alone. You are not done. You are not invisible. You are seen. And there is someone somewhere waiting for you to rise, because your story might be the one that sets theirs in motion. Maybe it starts with one step, one call, one conversation, or maybe, like Clarissa, it starts in silence, with a breath, with a baby in your arms, with no plan, just the decision to stay. And maybe, years from now, you'll sit across from someone who thinks they're too far gone, and you'll say, "You're already here." That one sentence could save a life, because you didn't give up on yours. So take this as your sign, not from fate, not from the stars, but from someone who once sat in the dark and whispered into nothing, only to realize someone was listening. And now it's your turn to listen, to rise, to remember you were never meant to vanish. You were meant to ignite.